My name is Michelle Cavallo, and I am the president of Business and Professional Women Florida, as we refer to ourselves, BPW. Welcome to the panel discussion, Women in Transition, Successfully Transitioning into Retirement, a topic I'm especially interested in because I'm just a few years away. Before I turn it over to our moderator, I want to extend a welcome to our BPW members. It is so great to see all of you. And to our guests, a very warm welcome as well. BPW is a 100-plus-year-old organization whose mission is to achieve equity for working women through advocacy, education, and connections. We have local chapters in some parts of Florida and a member-at-large option for others. All info about BPW can be found on our website at bpwfl.org. We have a state conference coming up in June, and you can find information about this and really anything you'd like to learn about our organization on the website. We're delighted to have you this evening. I will now turn it over to our past president, board of directors member, and Programs Committee Chair, Sheila Berry Oliver, who will be your host this evening.
And I wear one other hat, which is occupying a lot of my time at the moment, and that is editor of our statewide publications. So, I stay very busy within BPW. I want to welcome everybody here for this topic. Within BPW Florida, we did a survey of our members last fall to ask what topics related to women in transition that we had not yet talked about would they like to hear about. And the overwhelming response most frequently cited was transitioning into retirement. And I don't think that was because we have so many people who are retired. Rather, I think it was because we have so many people who are considering retiring sometime in the near future. So we thought that would be a good topic to address this evening. I'll be functioning as moderator, but since I am the one who's been retired the longest of those who are speaking this evening, I'll also be participating where it is appropriate. I think what all of us know is that on March 12th, we celebrated Equal Pay Day for women because women earn less on average than men do. At the same time, women live longer than men do. So the financial aspects of retirement are certainly impacted both by earnings and our longevity. And I'm sure we'll touch somewhat on that this evening. What I'm going to do is to ask each of us to briefly describe how our experience relates to this topic and to answer the question of how would you define retirement today? And I'll start off by saying that I worked full-time for 32 years in several different industries and then part-time for 9 years. And I have been retired now for 12 years. So that's almost as long, no, not quite as long. Well, a long time anyway. And my life has been very different in retirement than it was when I was working for compensation. For me, retirement is no longer being paid for the work that I'm doing. So I will ask each of the other panelists to give a little bit of their background as it's relevant and to also answer the question of how they would define retirement. And if I may, Kristen, I'll start with you.
All right. Thank you, Sheila. My name is Kristen Smith. I am in the BPW local in St. Pete, Pinellas, and I am a financial advisor at Raymond James and Associates. I've worked here for 27 years, but spent a few years in the industry at another firm before joining Raymond James. So I've spent, the better part of over 3 decades helping people plan for retirement. And I think it's changed a lot, to define retirement. We're trying to get away from that word, at least in my company. We tend to approach it more as financial freedom or planning for your second act. I just think it can be one of the most exciting and rewarding times of life. And I really have been thrilled to see the various varieties that my clients have brought to me over the years of different visions for what they want to do with their second act or their entrance to financial freedom. And to touch briefly on what Sheila had alluded to there, in our local, we have been, marking Equal Pay Day with an unhappy hour for 21 years. I've been the chair for all 21 years that we've been putting this on. And I got into that in part because of how I saw the impacts of unequal pay on the women's retirement plans that I was helping out with. So it is definitely a huge factor in planning for whatever financial freedom or worry-free retirement that you want to have.
Amy, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and answer that question from your perspective?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Amy Powell. I'm the founder of Aimwell Financial, and I've been in finance for over 20 years. I've not retired yet myself, although I'm working on it. I have a very good financial planner, but I have helped people retire hundreds of times. And so, I would say the one thing for me that stands out when we talk about defining retirement is that it's so individualistic these days. It used to be that you kind of worked until a certain age, you collected a pension, you maybe traveled or spent time with family before you ultimately end up in a retirement home or some similar situation. And now it's changed entirely, right? We talk so much more about possibility now, right? It's not the end of something, it's honestly the beginning of something. And so that's what I really love to talk to people about, is just kind of getting back to who we are as people, what we value, and finding the ways that we can live out that next part of our life in a way that reflects all of those things. So, I would say that there's no one way to retire. There are a lot of ways to do it, but finding what works best for my clients is really one of my passions.
And Kathy.
I am Kathy Brewer. I spent a 42-year career in direct mail, mainly in direct mail production. For all of you that seem to hate junk mail, don't hate it. It employed me for 42 years, kept me going. I owned my own company for 12 of those years. Prior to that, I also owned a restaurant, but that had nothing to do with the direct mail. But I've been retired since 2020. And all I can say is it is freaking outstanding. Okay. There's nothing. All I can tell everybody in this panel is get yourself set up, and we'll go into details, but it is the bomb. Okay. It's a second part of my life that I never envisioned. I never thought about, never even considered what I was going to do when I retired. So it was a shock to me when I was let go from my job, ironically, to the company that I sold my company to. So that was a little hard to take, but it's, to define retirement to me, it's basically my ability to wake up in the morning, to do something good for myself, which usually means exercise, to do something good for somebody else, which usually means the volunteering that I'm trying to do and trying to help with. I'm in Key Largo and I volunteer, and like I said, I'm on the board for Marvelous Pet Rescue. I'm very proud of that. And just to make good choices. And I'm able to do that. And I'm blessed with good health right now. And I'm hoping that that continues. So, I'll help anybody, I'll give my advice on what to do and what not to do to get to this point, because there's lots of don't do this. And you'll hear that tonight too.
Well, we'll get to advice probably later in the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that has come out a little bit, but I don't know if anybody wants to amplify it, is what a specific experience you have, either directly or indirectly, with transitioning into retirement. And I know in my case, my first direct experience with it was my husband, who retired, who is 8 years older than I am, and who retired in his middle 50s. So he's been retired for quite a while, and he was retired while I was still working full time. And that presented some challenges. And I'm sure in relationships where one person is retired and the other one is not, there are definitely those kind of challenges. But for me, it seemed to be an easy decision, that I was no longer finding fulfillment in the work that I was doing. and I was financially able to no longer work. And so I made the decision to stop working. So it was really no longer finding fulfillment that drove me to stop working. Amy, do you want to maybe talk about your experience with transitions to retirement?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not there myself, but I've helped people do this hundreds of times. And, one of the things that I think stands out for me is just, again, how things have evolved over time. And so, I think it's up to each person to really decide when the right time is for them. Sheila, one of the things that you said that stood out to me was that you didn't find your work fulfilling anymore. And so, I think for people who are lucky enough to be passionate in their careers, they could possibly continue on, indefinitely until other reasons interfere with that. But for some people, their work life was work and maybe not their true calling, right? So one of my favorite things to do is kind of thinking about a semi-retirement for a lot of clients. And I think this is something that's becoming way more popular these days. So sort of a phasing out of the prior life and a gradual increase to the new life. And that's one of my favorite ways to do it if someone can pull it off. I have somebody who I'm transitioning through right now that she's a doctor, but she has control over her own hours. And just as patients fall off, we're not necessarily refilling that book. And so, it's allowed her to more gradually approach how she wants to fill her time, because I think one of the most jarring things, and especially for someone like her who had a career that was very intense, right? It took a lot of her time. She went from probably 60, maybe even more hours a week to going to zero would be jarring. And so for her, it gives her time to kind of rediscover the things that are important to her, the things that she enjoys. And by the time she gets to the point where she's ready to shut down her practice, she won't be lost, right? She won't be in a situation where she wakes up the next morning and says, oh my gosh, now what? So, it's very individualistic, but the possibilities these days are just so much more interesting than they used to be.
Kathy, I think I heard when you were talking earlier that you may not have initiated the decision to retire.
Not at all. No, actually, it took me by surprise. It was during the pandemic. I was at that point in my career, I was a commission salesperson, and of course had quotas. And about 80% of my clients were clients that had events. And of course, during the pandemic, most events shut down, as most of the country did. So as a result, my salary or my commissions dropped off to nearly nothing. And my performance in bringing work in had the same thing. So the company just looked at the dollar figure as how valuable am I to the company if I'm not bringing money in. And so it was me and 5 other salespeople also were let go. So it was a shock. My husband and I were planning on retiring when we were both 63 and a half. He was working for a large corporation and we were just going to go on Cobra with him. But I was let go a year before that plan. So I was there kind of in limbo for a year going, do I go back to work? Do I, what do you do? And ultimately, time just took care of it. I mean, I couldn't see taking a job and committing to somebody for 3 months or 4 months. It's just, that's not right. That's not how I am. When you're in a career for 42 years, you just don't take something on. But I think the biggest thing that we haven't even talked about yet, and I know you will, is money, because nobody can retire unless they have some sort of income or they have some way to support themselves. People, you don't get Social Security. You can start collecting Social Security when you're 62, but if you guys have, anybody has looked at what their Social Security is going to be when they're 62, you're not going to live on that. So that's the whole key. And luckily, I started to, about 10 years earlier, look at that. But I did not look at money or retirement money until I was in my 50s, which is way late, as I know our advisors would agree. I mean, this is something that every person needs to look at when they honestly, in my opinion, when you start working, you need to start putting money away. So, I'd love to hear what Kristen and Amy have to say about that topic to everybody else. That there's great advice and everybody needs to hear it.
The next question that was on our list really feeds into the previous one for Kristen, and that was, how does either education or working with a financial professional contribute to a successful retirement transition? So Kristen, do you want to take the lead on that one, since I completely agree with Kathy that actually, if you read in the newspapers, I keep pretending that there's actually one in my hands I can read from. There are always articles about financially being ready for retirement. That's all they talk about in terms of being ready for retirement. And it's not the only thing that we're going to talk about tonight, but certainly an important piece. So could you start that off, Kristen?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the money is a big part of it. That's what most people worry about, men and women, but particularly the women. I find that the women tend to worry more about, will I run out? Will I have enough? What if I go broke? And I just want to scream every time I hear somebody saying, I don't want to be a bag lady. Men never say things and it's only the women. So you do need to, as Kathy said, start planning and saving and contributing to what will become a retirement fund as early as humanly possible. But the education aspect is, a lot of people don't realize how to figure out what they are really going to need. Let's say you're 35. What will I need when I'm 65? What does that look like? And it's very hard for a lot of people to visualize that. But for people like Amy and I, who help people get ready for retirement, we've already experienced a lot of different possible pitfalls and things, and we know what to anticipate, and we can help point our clients in the right direction, particularly the inflationary aspect. People in the last couple of years have talked a lot about inflation and how they feel it's hurt them in the economy, but inflation is always part of our life. Even if inflation's low and fairly benign, it means that a fixed income, if it isn't inflation adjusted, isn't going to buy you the same things 20 years into your retirement. And another, aspect about the planning and starting early is that, as many of us have heard the phrase, man plans, God laughs. Not many retirements go according to the original iteration of a plan. If you sit down at 40 and say, I want to retire by 55, I can guarantee you something's going to happen in those 15 years in between. It's going to completely blow that trajectory out of the water. It might be, a break from work where you have to do some caregiving for someone in your family. It might be a relocation. You might become ill or injured. There's so many things that can happen that are going to impact that plan, that if you're working with a professional, they may already have the tools to help you pivot. If you suddenly say, oh my God, I've just got let go 2 years before I plan to retire, what do I do now? And we can help you identify a better way to, allocate your income and your resources to meet your needs, or to change, what you thought you were going to do. And there's like Amy said, there's so many more resources and flexibility and new looks to retirement now that I still don't really like using the word. It's just another new phase where you go from accumulation to spending. And it's just a different aspect of what you're going to do with your financial assets during your lifetime.
But I have to say that that's a jolt when you go from accumulating to simply spending. When all of a sudden you no longer have a paycheck or income coming in, and you're only going to live off what you've already accumulated, that takes a while to get used to.
But if you're of the personality type that really needs the structure of a paycheck, you can do that. You can arrange your own pension with an annuitized stream of income. Now, some people out there may say annuity, bad word, but basically Social Security is an annuity. You put money into it all through your life, and you turn on the income stream when you want to collect. that's an annuitization. So if you need that structure, that lifetime guarantee, there are tools out there. Not everybody needs it though. That's why, as Amy said, it's very individualized. You've got to make sure the numbers make sense, but that the things, the aspects of the plan are also the kind of things that allow you to sleep well at night.
Amy, why don't you continue the conversation about financial planning?
Sure. Yeah. So, I'll tell you that, and Kristen can probably relate. One of the most frustrating things for me is when somebody comes to my door, knocks on it at age 65 and says, "Oh, I've retired, come help me." At that point, it's not that I can't help or that I won't help, but I would so much rather talk to people 5, 10, 20 years out, right? Because there's so much that can be done the earlier you get started. And so, I know it's a little cliche to say, hey, the best time to start is tomorrow, but it really is true. And if we just start somewhere, right? If we just start thinking about these things earlier, it's a lot easier to pivot when we have lots of time. So, that's always something that I really try to emphasize with people. And the other thing too is I think a lot of the reasons that people do that is there's so much information these days, and there are 1,000 people to listen to and to talk to, and it can be overwhelming to even figure out where to start, right? What do I do for savings? What kind of accounts do I use? What kind of investments do I use? One of my most important jobs is to just really understand the client and then understand what tools fit their situation, because, not everything fits everyone's situations. And so to go out there and focus on the pieces, right? The maybe data or articles that you might find out on the internet or on calculators and things like that, they don't take anyone's individual circumstances into account. And so applying those can be incredibly difficult if you're not sure what you're doing. And so, sometimes even if it's just nothing more than a conversation to get somebody on the right path, start thinking about the right things, start asking the right questions, just starting somewhere and opening that conversation and figuring out where we need to get started, that can help so much. So, I would say don't let the intimidation factor be the reason you don't do it, right? Even if you don't feel like you can start right now, there's probably something that can be done to at least get us thinking about the right path.
There are so many different components to financial freedom. One is I'm a non-financial person. So from my perspective, one aspect is retirement plans, which have changed. When I started working, there were retired benefit programs that assumed you were going to work 30 years for the same organization. I worked for 10 years for one of those organizations, which gave me 1/3 of the benefit. And that benefit was reduced by what the suspected Social Security payment was. So there's the retirement pension, there's Social Security, there's IRAs. How does one begin to take all of those different types of financial vehicles into account? Kristen or Amy, I'm going to toss that up for one of you two.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind starting. I hate to kind of beat a dead horse, but I'll try and make this more applicable, I think, to people who are listening and who might want to do more research on their own. The first place is to start with your workplace, right? So usually there are things that you can take advantage of that might offer a free match, might offer some benefits to you that, believe it or not everybody takes advantage of. There are so many people who don't even claim the free money that their employer gives them to contribute to a 401k or maybe an HSA contribution. And so, starting there can be a really good way to just get your toe in the water, right? Start thinking about those things. And once you've started there, perhaps start branching out into other ways that you might be able to save out of your own discretionary income and what might be the best tools to do that. it's always hard because every situation is so different, and depending on tax brackets, depending on what our future incomes might look like versus our current incomes, it can be daunting. But that's one of the reasons that, really understanding the situation of the person that we are working with, or that we are speaking with, and helping to guide them in the right direction is so important. And I would say, consider a lot of different sources when you're having those conversations, right? So a CPA will have a very different view of things than an estate planning attorney, than a financial advisor. So, you want to make sure you're taking all the perspectives in, right? Not just necessarily one view of everything.
Kristen?
Well, I agree with what Amy was saying. And, just to take it a little step further into the details, that when I start working with someone, usually the first thing that I do, even if they've come to me with an agenda saying, here's what I want to talk to you about, Kristen, I will instead take a step back and we establish a baseline for a financial plan. And that involves just doing all of the discovery work to say, well, what are your assets? What are your liabilities? What are your income sources? What's your knowledge of the different financial products? What's your risk tolerance? And start sifting through that. And with the experience that, Amy and I have had over, 2 or 3 decades of working with people, we kind of can, point you in the direction of some of the things, the products and the types of accounts that you outlined earlier, Sheila, that might become too confusing for people who are just trying to take it all in on their own, and instead, sort out and just not worry about some of the things that might not be appropriate for that person's situation, and just get them the basic foundational knowledge and give them the comfort zone to talk in financial terms, because we as women do tend, overall to be much more conservative, with what we're willing to invest in. And if we feel uncomfortable or that something's too risky, we pull back. And not only starting too late and like having someone come in, like she said, and said, I'm 65 and I just retired, what do I do? No, instead, look at these things while you still have time to alter your behaviors and make small adjustments a little at a time to get you, more where you need to be. Because there's nothing that makes me happier than surprising someone and who says, hey, I'm 55. I really hope I can retire by 65 or 70. But when we run all the numbers, I can tell them you can retire at 58. They're thrilled, they're amazed, and they show me how. And we can lay out the spending and income plan, and yes, there will be changes and adjustments along the way, but if they see it in print, they often have a better sense of confidence for trying something new. And, I've been very blessed that I have a lot of clients who actually will follow the advice I give them, because there's nothing more frustrating than someone who goes off out in left field when you tell them you can afford to spend $4,000 a month, out of your retirement savings, and you'll be fine. And you meet with them a year later and they tell you, well, yeah, I spent $12,000 a month. Well, that was not what we discussed. Frustrating.
Kathy, go ahead.
But I just want to add that I can't stress enough that this whole financial planning for yourself really needs to start at a very young age. I mean, when I had my business, I was in my early 30s. I was a single mom. It was just my income, if that, and that didn't even come to play. I was hand to mouth. I had X amount of dollars to spend at the grocery store, and that was it. And if I had just taken half of some money somewhere, which I wasted because everybody wastes money, and put it into a savings or and work with a financial planner, I would not have had the rude awakening at 55 when I went, oh my God, what am I going to do? And if this conversation can get anybody that's listening to get on board right away, go to their HR department, see what they have available for you. 401s for sure. I had a company match of 5%. I mean, how do you turn away that? They stopped it after 3 years, but it was still 5% for 3 years. And And HSAs are another great suggestion. Fabulous. I mean, that's free money. I mean, it's tax-free money. It's just, and everybody is going to need it at some point, and you can use it for any medical reason at all. But just, I can't stress enough, start early, do it. Don't wait till you're 55 and go, I think I want to retire. And I mean, if you and hook up with a financial planner, hook up with somebody that can give you some good advice, and start getting some plans going. It's crucial. It's crucial because you don't want to. I have talked to so many people that say, I can never retire. I can't, especially people that work like waitresses and don't claim all their cash. Beauticians, people that, are not claiming all their money. So therefore their social security is going to be very, very low. They're not going to have anything to live on. So it makes a difference between saying that retirement's freaking awesome or saying I'm going to have to work until I die. Take your pick.
Yeah,
Kathy, you touched on something that somebody put into the chat, which is planning for retirement when you're employed by somebody else versus planning for retirement when you're self-employed.
Totally different.
And I wonder who would like to touch that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start on that. When you're self-employed, it can take a little bit more dedication to make sure that you actually take the time to set those plans up for yourself and to contribute to them. But, this is somewhere where working with a good CPA is really important because, there are a lot of people who are self-employed who don't realize that they're entitled to put money away into certain kinds of accounts that could really reduce their tax liabilities. And it's different than what you would get if you're contributing to a 401k at your own employer. There are different rules, there are different limits as to what you can put in. And for a lot of self-employed people, that's more and a lot more. And so, sometimes we're leaving money again on the table because we're not considering that the tax impact of being able to put that money away and let it grow for retirement, especially if we're in a self-employed situation where our income bracket is maybe high and will be high until we retire or sell a business. That can be really, really important. It can make a huge difference in how long someone's assets might live.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy or Kristen, do you want to add anything to that? Okay. Somebody touched on this, and I don't know who actually did, but the tax implications for retirement. I know somebody asked if we would be touching on tax implications, and I'm not sure if that's in terms of the kind of income we're getting or the kind of assets that we're using. Can either Kristen or Amy, can you talk about taxes for retirees?
Happy to start the conversation. I was talking with a client just today and it never ceases to amaze me how little people realize about the tax implications, even though they're very educated, successful people. The client I was talking to is in his mid-60s and he's made high six figures for most of his adult life. And he thought that everything he was going to spend in retirement coming up in a few months was going to be tax-free. Like, what?
Oh, dear.
Oh, no. So if you are saving in a tax deferred account, like an IRA or a 401k, traditional, savings that go into those types, you get a break on your taxes now. Let's say if you put $10,000 into a 401k and you're making $100,000, you only pay taxes on 90. So it gives you a current tax break, and the money that goes in grows, tax deferred until you start withdrawing it in retirement. The catch-22 there is that a lot of folks, particularly doctors, and I know Amy mentioned she was working with one, they have a really bad habit of putting a ton of money into like a 401k kind of arrangement and not having a lot of other money set aside in practices or professions where there's high liability. a lot of those professionals like to shelter all of their money in these retirement accounts so they're protected from creditors. So then they get into retirement and discover that 100% of what they're pulling out is going to be taxable. Most of your Social Security is going to be taxable. You know, chances are your pensions are going to be taxable. Your investment income outside of IRAs and 401ks is taxable. So you may find out you're not necessarily in a lower tax bracket when you retire, as a lot of people assume they will be. So planning for the tax consequences along the way can help guide you toward whether or not maybe you'd be better off in a Roth IRA or having Roth 401k contributions where you don't get a current year tax break, but everything that grows inside there is not taxed. And when you withdraw the money later to live on in retirement, it's also tax-free. And there likewise are investment vehicles like municipal bonds that produce tax-free income. So trying to figure out the mix of where your income is going to come from and what tax bracket you're going to be comfortable with is a huge part of the equation, you know, for years leading up to the retirement, so people aren't, you know, shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just add that probably a couple of the biggest mistakes I see people make is one, they don't consider that your taxable income actually affects your Medicare premiums. And so a lot of people don't realize that until they find out the hard way.
Right.
So, we have to consider the implications of any withdrawals or any other taxable income as part of that when we're considering where to draw from. Another big mistake that I tend to see is, there are a lot of ages to track, right? So there's the age you collect Social Security, there's the age you collect required distributions. There's a lot that goes on there, but at some point, we're going to hit a stage where you're basically kind of at the lowest income you're ever going to have. So for a lot of people, that's going to be age 72, 73, whenever the required distributions kick in. And once we hit that, your tax bracket's probably never going to be lower than that again. And so sometimes there is the opportunity, especially if somebody retires early, but even if someone retires at the usual 65, there might be some years in there where we have relatively low tax brackets. Because again, once we kick into a stage where we have forced income now, you're going to collect Social Security at 70 if you wait that long. You're going to have to take required distributions. Once you hit there, you can't go back. So it is really important to look at that window right after retirement and see how has that affected our income. Is there the opportunity to maybe create some tax savings in the future? And there may not be, but it's something that everybody should ask, especially if your tax bracket is a lot different post-retirement.
Is the advice that you are giving the same whether one is a high income earner or a low income earner?
No, it's actually wildly different. And honestly, it's also different based on what the estate plan is. Somebody who intends to give away all their money to charity, for example, is going to be a lot different than somebody who might be leaving large IRAs to children who may be in certain tax brackets that could cause them trouble. So, this is where the individualistic side of it really comes in, because it's not only about what's happening this year or next year. It's really, what is the intent of this money, right? What is the purpose of the money, and what happens at all stages? And so, yeah, it's not easy, right? But honestly, that's why some of us have jobs where, this is what we focus on day in and day out. There's just so much nuance that most people don't realize until they're in it, right, and you see the complications.
I know we have spent a lot of time talking about the financial aspects of retirement. What I'd like to ask next is, what is one unexpected challenge to retiring that is unrelated to finances, and what recommendations do you have dealing with that? I know, Amy, you and I have talked about the fact that you've spent a lot of time working with clients adjusting to retirement in the non-financial aspect. So could you take this one first?
Sure. Yeah. So one thing that people don't realize is that in the first year after retirement, about 40% of people actually struggle with either anxiety or depression because of the change in their lifestyles. And so one of the biggest things that happens when somebody retires, and again, going back to the phasing that I talked about earlier, if we can find ways to counteract that, that is something that's really important, I think, to help ease into retirement. But people don't necessarily realize how much of their social connection comes from work, how much of their sense of purpose comes from work, how much of their structure in their day. You know, I'm sure we've all been there where you haven't had to work and you look up at the clock and it's already 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you have no idea where the day is gone, right? And so there are a lot of things that can come along with that change. And, you know, all of the commercials out there, all of the advertising out there will tout retirement as this really happy time, right? This extended permanent vacation. And so, you know, it's fun in the honeymoon period, right? There's the fun period immediately after. But if we're not careful, you know, some of the people that I think do the worst in retirement, the ones who I see maybe not live as long or who experience more cognitive issues, are people who, you know, they unplug from their job. The next day they kind of sit in front of the TV, and the next thing they know, 20 years has gone by. And so, you know, planning for that ahead of time to make sure that we stay mentally sharp, that we're still engaging socially, that we've dealt with some of the emotional challenges that can come up after you retire. There are a lot of feelings, right? Sheila said earlier, it's scary to go from a regular income to not. And so, you know, if we don't address all of those things, then those are things that, you know, I've seen people fail retirement in a few different ways, but, but, you know, those can really derail things if you don't pay attention to them.
Kathy, do you
I
have
think
any thoughts on this?
I'd say, no, Amy's hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's definitely the first thing I find is that people just get bored and they don't get that, like I said, either the TV or their computer. They're on their computer all day long and they don't do anything. And for me, my outlet, thankfully, was the rescue. And I found the rescue way before I retired, and it wasn't a retirement plan per se, but it fills my day some weeks, and some weeks it's quiet. Most of the time it's not. few of our listeners know what we're talking about, but I just think volunteering for me was my saving grace because I didn't have a plan. My husband, on the other hand, said he had a plan, and it's not happening for him. So, you know, it's just depends on each person. So, but again, I still go back to I keep leaning back to the finances, because you can't play this game and have fun, okay, if you don't have a peace of mind knowing that, you know, if your house paid for. I mean, that number one. I mean, if you're going into retirement with a mortgage, God help you, you know, I mean, it's not easy, you know, or if you want, you know, and say you do have the money and you want, then now there's your chance to travel and to do the things you planned on doing, but having a plan going into this, and nobody plans for that. I didn't plan for this. I mean, it came unexpected, but I was going to expect to retire a year later. So that in that one, you know, up until then, I didn't have a plan. So, and I think I'm typical of most people. I don't, you know, I mean, I don't know. It can be very scary. It can be very lonely. Your work friends were your work friends, period. They're not your friends after you leave work. Okay. As much as you love them and want to be around them. I had employees that I considered my family, but when that business closed, they were gone. You know, it's just, I'm sorry, Ilya, I don't mean to scare you, but I'm just trying to get you, you know, you 40 years goes fast. You don't think how fast it goes, but it does. It just flies by. And if you're not prepared, then you're not going to have as much fun as I am. No, I'm not. I'm just joking. I wasn't prepared either. And I got lucky and in a lot of ways, and I'm blessed, but it's just, you need to think about this now. And that's why I'm so happy to be part of this panel and be part of this group, because to give this awareness to women and you know, everyone, men too. You got to get the husbands on board. You know, if they're not on board with you, you know, it makes it more difficult. So, not trying to scare anybody.
Well, and I'll just add to that really quickly is, you just made a really good point. Men are actually some of the ones who struggle the most with this because they're not the ones who are maybe as proactive in building a social network and building all of those other things outside of work. And so, we have to kind of think of that together, right? And sometimes you'll see the husband's retirement plan is really just to hang out with wife. And so if that's what you're okay with,
Yeah.
that's what you're okay with, but
Yeah.
probably has to be more to it than that. And so, so, that's something to keep an eye on too. And that's a really good point.
Yeah, and another good point that Kathy made is that you really can't separate the financial aspect of the planning from the emotional aspect and the time planning, because trying to figure out what is it you envision. That's where I really get into this with my clients. Not just give me a number, I need X to live on. We get down into the nitty gritties on where will you spend your money, because it ties into how they'll spend their time and what are the other needs, what other family members come into play, whether it's a generation above or below you, and trying to figure out where you might invest some of yourself, your soul, into what you envision this retirement being. So it's a transition that you can look forward to, not be afraid of.
I think an organization like BPW is one that helps, at least for me, it did. It provided some continuity and allowed me to stay invested in issues for working women, even though I was no longer working. It helped me in the transition from Virginia to Florida. So it naturally flowed from there that it would also help when I stopped working, but that was not sufficient. And so I found that I reached out for other opportunities and joined other boards of nonprofits that I felt passionate about. And that's where I got my fulfillment from. So to me, that was one of the positive outcomes of retirement, was that when I was in information technology and management consulting, working 60 hours a week, I didn't have time just to be on boards of nonprofit organizations. I had enough time to work and eat and sleep, and that was about it. So retirement provided an opportunity for me to do some things that I wasn't able to do when I was working full time. So I'd like to segue that into asking the other three panelists, what's a positive outcome of retirement? Since we've talked about some of the negatives, what's a positive outcome of someone transitioning into retirement, either from your perspective or from one of your clients' perspectives?
I'll start. I'd say the most positive aspect for me is the lack of stress. I was in a very high energy, stressful environment with goals that were seemingly unreachable. And just to wake up in the morning and say, what am I going to do today? Or knowing, as most of my friends know, that if it doesn't go on my calendar, it doesn't happen. So I do make sure that I have it on my calendar. But it's just so refreshing to know that, I have this day for myself and I can do this and do it any way I want to. And it's just, I'm not tied to anybody. I'm not beholden to clients. I'm not, I have deadlines. I have things I have to do, for the rescue or for myself and things like that. But it's just refreshing. And it's a nice way to go, I made it. I can finally relax. So that's why I said retirement's freaking awesome. Get everybody if you can retire at 50, retire at 50. You can retire at 45, God bless you, do it. But do everything you can, because just to say that I worked till I died is not how I want to go out.
Kristen?
There's so many wonderful, positive stories I've seen over the years. I'm hard pressed at the moment to just share only one, but Kathy is a great example of someone who's found something to be passionate about and fulfilled. And I've seen people who are fulfilled in retirement, but then end up working again simply because they've found a new skill or discovered a new passion, and it just happens to pay a salary. So you get to try something new, reinvent yourself, And, whether it's
Mhm.
devoting more time to, your church, your family, a hobby, learning a new language, or traveling, or there's just so many things in the world that people can discover that I've seen endless great outcomes from retirement. And in some cases, it's lots of mini retirements. I have one client who's retired 3 times officially. And only 2 of them did we let him have a retirement party, because the third time we said, no more. But retired, took a couple years off, did some fun stuff, and then found the new passion, went back into another line of work for a few years, did it again. So I just think of it as great life stage planning, not just retirement. It's a goal. It's the beginning of another phase of journey.
Mhm. Very true.
Yeah, I'll say one of the cooler stories that I have is a woman who, she worked in real estate, and she was fortunate enough because of the income properties that she accumulated to retire early. And so at age 65, she went back to school and is getting her degree in music. And so she's getting to learn all these instruments and learning how to perform and do all these things that she just never would have been able to do if she had a full-time job, right? So when I call her, I have to be careful to make sure she's not in class, because usually she's just as busy as the college students that are in her program as well. So, it's something that keeps her very young and vibrant, and you can just see how much passion she has for it. So, that one's really fun. And I would say, getting the time to reconnect with family too, as Kathy kind of said, at the end of people's lives, you're not going to remember work, maybe bits and pieces, but it's really going to be spending time with the people that really mean something to you. And, some of the clients I've worked with have used the opportunity to maybe move back home or to live with family, and not because they had to, but because, some of their most cherished memories were getting to do that when their parents retired, and getting to spend time with them that, otherwise they may never have gotten to have with those people that they love. And so, we always have to remember that we never know how long we have here, right? And so if we can take the time to do that, and, the difference is a couple of years working at our desk versus spending that time in a way that's meaningful, and is something that you'll remember at that point, is one of the nicer stories that I've gotten to hear.
At this point, I would like to ask each of you, what one piece of advice would you give to others about transitioning into a successful retirement? I'm just going to toss that up and see who grabs it
I'll
first.
grab it. Okay, so I think I'm speaking for everybody, because each one of us has said this more than once tonight. Have a plan. That's the first piece of advice, and it's got to incorporate the financial and the emotional, of course. But the other part to that is you need to revisit the plan continually. You don't make it and just set aside to gather dust. And if you can't or don't want to work with a financial professional, then at least share your plan with a trusted friend or someone whose opinion you respect, because the accountability aspect of having a plan is a huge part of whether it's going to be successful or not.
Yeah, and I'll echo that again. For people who aren't necessarily going to go that route, that doesn't mean that you can't still lean on your community, right? Talk to mentors, talk to people who are already retired, talk to people who are maybe in some of the organizations that you might be interested in. Really try to just open your mind to what might be possible, and learn from other people that have done it before. One of the most valuable things for me is having seen this hundreds of times, and seeing the ways it goes right and seeing the ways it goes wrong, right? And so the more you can just open yourself up to other people's experiences and to learn from that, we're all only going to have our own retirement once, unless you're Kristen's client and 3 times. But it's something that you want to feel good about, right? It should be an exciting transition in your life. And so lean on people, make sure that that you really put the time in to do that.
My biggest advice that I've been echoing all evening is start early. Don't wait. Don't say I'll get to it later, or I'm not old enough. It doesn't affect me yet. It will affect you. Make that decision now. Put aside, get with there's in BPW, we have lots of great people that you can reference and can go sit down and talk to, and they won't most likely charge you for a small talk or say, set me on a path, and get that path going and follow it. I think you'll never regret it. You don't want to be like me at 55 and going, oh my God, what am I going to do? So, you don't want to be there. Having that safety net, okay, will let you enjoy your retirement that much more.
And the advice that I would give is to be flexible. When I retired, I didn't retire to something. I didn't really know how I was going to spend my time. And over time, I realized I needed something to fill more of my time. And then I went looking for organization. I was lucky enough, we had somebody come speak to our local BPW about a girls organization, Girls Inc. of Pinellas, and they were looking for board members, and it struck a chord. But it's being flexible and looking for opportunities that bring fulfillment or being able to spend time with family. So I want to thank the panelists, Kristen Smith, Kathy Brewer, and Amy Powell for joining me in this conversation. Hopefully you all heard or found something informative and interesting and useful in our conversation. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Everybody who registered for the webinar will in fact receive a link that contains the recording, and the recording will also be put out onto YouTube so that you can share it. And
well, this is
a
lot of fun. Oh, I just said this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Good. I enjoyed it too. Thank you all for joining
Absolutely.
us. Have a great evening.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.